Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage, in which Michael K. Vaughan and I talk about some comic book or comic book related issue once every week. And all of BookTube waits for those videos with bated breath. And I noticed Michael does the picking for our weekly foray into the world of comic books. He picks what we're going to talk about. But I cheekishly proposed a volume for today because I saw in an Amazon listing, I think, or it might have been a catalog, that a new Epic collection was coming out this week. What I thought was new, Epic collection. And the Epic collection is a paperback full-color reprint line from Marvel Comics that is a comic book fan's dream come true, because they're not limited in size of the Marvel Masterworks hardcovers. And they're also not limited in terms of strict chronology. The Epic collections can bounce all around the long lifespan of a superhero character or superhero comic book. With the result that the numbering is a little bit odd, a little bit idiosyncratic. Fans have been loving it and hating it since the Marvel first introduced these things. They didn't just go Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, because they're not following the characters in chronological order. I believe the first, for instance, X-Men Epic collection was not the first 20 issues of X-Men. I think that came later. Same thing with Spider-Man, and the same thing very much true with our character today, the mighty Thor from Marvel Comic Books, which is Stan Lee's crackpot genius idea to take the Norse god of thunder and make him a superhero. You wouldn't think it would work for a minute. When you look at it on paper, you wouldn't think it would work for a minute, but it does. And Thor is one of a handful of Marvel characters that works better the longer the series goes on, the more Stan Lee got a handle on what he was doing. Some of the characters Stan Lee got right away. But some of them, no. Some of them, not quite. I would argue, for instance, that a character like Doctor Strange was perfectly conceived from the beginning and didn't need much in the way of elaboration, just further adventures. But Thor, when he started out, oh, oh no. Same thing with the Avengers. I famously did a takedown of Avengers #1 because it doesn't work at all. In its first few issues, it doesn't work at all on any level. Thor as well, Stan Lee had to give the Norse god of thunder some sort of weakness, and he does. He gives him a mortal identity as Dr. Donald Blake, a surgeon, a doctor, really a miracle worker. He doesn't have a specified field of medicine. He lives in New York, and he is crippled. He needs a cane to walk around, and when he rams his wooden cane on the ground, he transforms into Thor. And in this idea of Thor, Thor can't let go of his hammer for more than 60 seconds, or he will turn back into Donald Blake. Stan Lee got a lot of mileage out of that, a lot of mileage. In a Funhouse Mirror version of Billy Batson and Captain Marvel, right? Where the newspaper salesman, the orphan Billy Batson, is told by an ancient wizard, if you say this magic word, my name, you will transform into Captain Marvel, my foremost agent of good on Earth, and you will have vast superpowers. You will transform into an adult with vast superpowers. And Billy Batson does, often. And the weak spot there is that for some unaccountable reason, Captain Marvel regularly decides to change back to Billy Batson. In the original run of Captain Marvel, he is not Billy Batson. He's a different person. That is gone now. The character is now, for legal reasons, marketed as Shazam, and he is very much characterized in the comics and on the big screen as a boy who can transform into a much bigger body, but he's still a boy. In the original version of Captain Marvel, that wasn't true. Captain Marvel was a separate individual, and it never made any sense to me why Captain Marvel would ever transform back into Billy Batson and do whatever it is that Billy Batson does all day long. When Captain Marvel's existence is to fight evil, why wouldn't he just do that 24 hours a day? But the weakness there is that when Captain Marvel, for reasons passing understanding, transforms back into a little twerp, the little twerp can be hit on the head, he can be knocked unconscious, he can be gagged so that he can't say his magic word, etc., etc. In Thor's case, under Stan Lee's creation, it's that he can't be separate from his hammer. Gimmicks like that, Stan Lee got a huge amount of mileage out of them. And he, as I mentioned, got better as he went along. Which means that the Marvel Epic collections that collect the early adventures of Thor aren't worth the paper they're printed on. Now, of course, Michael K. Vaughan, since I maintain that he is quite mad, and since I maintain that Stately Vaughan Manor may very well be Arkham Asylum, since all of those things are true, of course, Michael K. Vaughan has all of those editions. I'll leave a link to the video that he made on this particular Epic collection, where he shows you all his other Epic collections, including Epic collections of $40 a piece. Doesn't matter to him. Including Epic collections of issues that he himself says are terrible. He got them anyway. He has them anyway. Anyway, I saw that an Epic collection, a Thor Epic collection, was coming out this week, and I cheekily suggested it, and he said just fine. But it turns out, he informed me right away, it isn't a new Epic collection, it's a reprint of an older one. One thing that Michael and I have learned, I don't think he knew it, I certainly didn't know it before we started doing these Epic Wednesdays, is how many Epic collections have become enormously valuable since they were issued. They appear to be some sort of a collector's item. I don't know that a reprint will do anything to harm that, but the original version of the Epic collection that came out this week is well over $100 to buy, if you want to buy a copy. It's The Wrath of Odin. We're a little washed out here because it's a very overcast day, but we'll manage. There you have a classic Jack Kirby, Vince Colletta cover. That is Thor facing off against the Destroyer. No coincidence that is the scene that's used here. There are a lot of better scenes that you could have used here, but the Destroyer, of course, was the villain in the first Thor movie, where Loki animates this massively powerful suit of armor that has a disintegration beam and metal all over and whatnot. As Michael points out in his own video, at the conclusion of that movie, after the only really effective moment in the movie where Thor gets his powers back, he beats the Destroyer in the fight scene at the end of that movie is, maybe generously speaking, 3 minutes long. When in reality, in the comic books, as we're told when the Destroyer is introduced, the issue where he's introduced is an annual, a king-sized annual, and he's introduced that's in this issue. It's in this volume. We're told in that volume, Odin, the father of Thor and the king of the Norse gods, says that he made the Destroyer to help Asgard at the end of days in the Battle of Ragnarok, and that it pleased Odin to make the Destroyer invincible, indestructible. So Thor's hammer can't make a dent on him. The Destroyer never tires. He's much stronger than Thor, all that sort of thing. He's unbeatable. In that king-sized issue, when the Destroyer returns, where no one was expecting him to return, when he returns, Thor, of course, leaps into battle and fights the Destroyer. Why he does that is an open question, because Odin is standing right there. It's his toy. He made it. But that's going to come up a lot in our discussion here. But there's a great multi-page action panel scene that Kirby draws, where Thor pounds on the Destroyer over and over and over again, using his speed to make sure that the Destroyer can't get a blow in himself. And then the final panel is all across the bottom of the page, in which the Destroyer is actually falling backwards. And Thor says in that panel, "Asgard be praised, I have achieved the impossible. I have downed the Destroyer." Of course, it's only temporary. Thor can't beat the Destroyer. Really, on his own, he can't beat the Destroyer. You have to finnick around with whatever spirit is animating the Destroyer, because the Destroyer is just a suit of armor. You need, like in the movie, you need someone to animate the suit of armor, otherwise it just stands there. Who Odin was going to deputize for that job at Ragnarok, I don't know. But anyway, this Epic collection has been reprinted this week. And it's waiting for me at my local Barnes & Noble, but I thought, it's a really rotten day, and I have all of these issues anyway. I have, for instance, do I have it here? Yeah, I have the Marvel Masterworks volumes that reprinted all of these. The Marvel Masterworks volumes are very different from the Epic collections because they're proceeding in chronological order. Here, the number on the spine really does mean something, because they're marching slowly forward. I don't know if Marvel Masterworks volumes are still made, but I don't know that they're continuing with Thor. They seem... I don't know. I don't really understand what governs what new Marvel Masterworks volumes comes out and which ones don't. They're expensive, more expensive, twice as much as the Epic collections. The Epic collections are just a better deal. But this one was reprinted this week. And Michael informed me of that. This is not actually a new Epic collection, but a fine opportunity to talk about a humdinger of a period in Thor history. Now, in Michael's video, he mentions, as so many Thor fans do, the Walt Simonson run that he and I will eventually get to. And he offhandedly refers to it in his video as the greatest Thor run of all time, the greatest period on this comic. I don't agree. I think the heyday of Thor is the heyday of Lee and Kirby, with Vince Colletta doing the inking on Kirby, which is this. It's this epic collection. It's also the epic collection right before this one, and right after, I believe. I think this is the pinnacle. In these issues of Thor, you have a few pages at the beginning, and then a backup feature. For most of the issues that are collected here, you had a backup feature called Tales of Asgard. So the Thor's adventure, a lot of you who are collecting comics now and are maybe very young will know that DC Comics has revived the idea of backup features, and almost all of their comics have them now. It was still the same creative team, though, so it didn't feel the same as sending in the subs as it does today, because the Tales of Asgard was still written by Jack Kirby, or written by Stan Lee, drawn by Jack Kirby, and usually inked by Vince Colletta. It was the same creative team, and boy, oh boy, were those tales great. They had nothing to do with the main story. They were just mythological history of Asgard, Thor and his friends, and Odin and whatnot, in their fabled realm eternal, not Earth adventures, no skyscrapers in the background. And this volume starts off right where the last one left off, with Thor and Hercules coming back from an adventure that they were sharing, and Thor immediately becoming embroiled in extragalactic events, because Jack Kirby goes from the mythological, which was the last cycle of this run, to science fiction. The colonizers of Rigel, who are in great danger, and Thor asks leave to go back to Earth to see his beloved Jane Foster, and he asked this leave of his father Odin, the king of the Norse gods, who is forever exiling Thor and yelling at him and screaming at him because he is soiling his birthright by loving a mortal woman. Now, keep in mind, later on in Thor continuity, it's going to be revealed that Thor's mother is not an Asgardian. So Odin is once again being the father of all hypocrites. But at one point here, he says to Thor, "Thy love for Jane Foster hath endured for lo these many months. It hath overcome every obstacle. I shall deny it no longer." Thor says, "My lord, you mean you give us leave to be wed?" And Odin says, "If that be thy wish, my son." What happens to that Odin? I have no idea. Literally 20 years after this issue, he is still yelling at Thor for being in love with a mortal skankho. Thor goes back to Earth and is immediately embroiled in the intergalactic affairs of the colonizers of Rigel, who have a big problem. The colonizers of Rigel have a big problem. I want to get to the artwork here so I can show it to you, because it was a fad at the time to do photographic backgrounds for comic book illustrations, and Jack Kirby loved to do that, and it works really well. And the big problem that the colonizers of Rigel have is someone we've met before. It's the living planet Ego, who is angry as always, has a gigantic face as always, and Thor has to confront the living planet Ego on behalf of the colonizers of Rigel, and he manages to defeat the living planet of Ego in a very interesting way. Let me see if I can go straight to it. It's nothing that we've ever seen before in a Thor comic book, and we never see it again. Thor is fighting Ego deep in the bowels of the living planet, and he does something. "Now 'tis time to break free of this planet, to leave yon bioverse forever behind, and break free we shall by the power of Thor." And you expect, okay, the power of Thor, that means he's going to swing his hammer or cause a lightning bolt or a thunderstorm or something. But instead, he casts a spell. That is a spell. He is reciting a spell with rhymed couplets and everything. He's not swinging his hammer. He's carrying his colleague, the recorder of Rigel. We never see Thor do sorcery other than that. But it does happen. And Ego says, "For the first time in countless millennia, I have been bested. Never again shall I suffer such humiliation." That's what you think, bub. But while Thor is helping the colonizers of Rigel, something else is happening. These Ego the Living Planet issues are fairly standard Stan Lee science fiction. He was very much in the Asimov style school of science fiction. So it isn't all that much to write home about, but something else was happening in these issues in the background, quite literally, because that Tales of Asgard backup feature was cooking with a story of a warlord named Hurricane. In the ancient days of Asgard, so it has no effect on the present story. And in the ancient days, Thor eventually fights with the warlord Hurricane and punches him so hard that it seems like it's going to kill him. He seems like he's going to die. In fact, he is mortally wounded. Hurricane says in that backup story that he's actually taken so many wounds over a long lifetime of fighting that it isn't Thor alone who killed him. It sure looks like it. And the backup feature, okay, Thor fights a warlord. There's plenty of action sequences. He and the Warriors 3 get to do all sorts of action sequences for that Jack Kirby so excelled at. And then it took off. I can't have been the only reader who bought this issue of Thor on the stands and read the Colonizers of Rigel thing, where Thor basically casts a spell at the end and gets everybody out of trouble by defeating the living planet rather easily, when an entire spacefaring civilization could not do it. I can't be the only one who read this first issue, read that and thought, that was kind of anticlimactic, and then got to the Tales of Asgard for that issue and was blown away. Blown away, because Hurricane doesn't die. Instead, the Black Stallion of Death comes riding to his door. He can't even sit up. And in the wake of the Black Stallion of Death comes she, what's the wording? She before whom all who live must one day bow. Hela, the goddess of death. Thoom, thoom go the drums. They see Hurricane is so wounded he can't even sit on the horse himself. He has to be lowered onto the horse. Thoom, thoom, as Hela and her death maidens arrive. For Hurricane. She arrives for Hurricane. He's slumped on his horse as she leads him through the square and into the mist and a bridge. He can barely sit up. He is a dead man. But then the mist starts to clear. And there's a golden bridge with men on the other side who are calling to Hurricane. Here wilt thou find the heraldry of battle, the adventure thy spirit craves. Here amidst the pageantry everlasting. Know thou, Hurricane, that death is more than an ending. 'Tis the greatest beginning of all. To our side, then, warrior, we await thee in our serried ranks. See, the men are calling to Hurricane on the other side of the mist. See, there's a golden path that leads to another land, the land of Valhalla. And Hurricane suddenly starts to speak. He sits up in his seat. The weariness doth leave my limbs. I feel new strength within me, vigor, such as I have never known. The sound of battle, the clang of armor, the most joyous music ever heard. And then we get this. Just look at how beautiful this is. Suddenly he's alive again, and he thunders across the bridge to his fate, to fight and live and joy forever in Valhalla. He says, to arms then, one and all, let the trumpets blare, let the flags unfurl, the call to battle fills the air. Now shall a warrior ride. And he goes thrumming across the bridge to his destiny. And it's just 10 times better than any action that was taking place in the actual issue. Just 10 times better. But Thor goes back to Earth, and there are many shenanigans. The trolls, the age-old enemies of Asgard, are very much active here. They're not only, they have an extraterrestrial's help, so they have an upgrade in weapons, so they attack Asgard. But they also attack Thor. It's a two-pronged attack. They attack Thor at home. And I remember this issue so vividly. I had 50 cents. I had 50 cents. So in other words, my pockets were full of money. That was a lot of money. I had 50 cents, and I had to pick which comics I wanted. This was 12 cents, and I made this decision without thinking. The others, I parsed. There was always a moment when I was getting down to the end. Okay, well, this one's yes, and this one's a yes. But then, I've only got 27 cents left. How do I spend this? But this 12 cents, it was easy to do. Just easy to make. Because this was that moment in Tales of Asgard really convinced me that this was a great period in Thor. But then there was a moment in this issue, the trolls attack Dr. Donald Blake, naturally, since he's the weak spot of Thor. They attack him and grab his walking stick. And one of the trolls says, I'll do it myself. If it doesn't work, in other words, if it doesn't transform into Mjolnir, the enchanted hammer, I'll kill you myself before Ulik, chief of the trolls, can reach you. And Don Blake says, now, I've got to reach out. My fingers must touch it, just as it strikes the floor. If I miss, I'm finished. And the heading exposition for the next panel goes, by the star-studded skies of Asgard, Donna Blake does not miss. And then you have Thor suddenly there again. And you notice Kirby could easily have just had Thor standing there, or could have added one panel, but he gives it the whole page to do for that moment. And that coincides. This is great Kirby poetry in here. Kirby artwork. Just great stuff. I want to show you another example. Thor fights some human level creatures. He fights the growing man, a robot who gets bigger the more you hit him. He fights a creature called Replicus, who is also a robot. Very strange issue. This is the title. Who is Replicus? But Replicus tells us who he is. He's just a killer robot with all sorts of advanced capabilities. The real question is, who is Replicus's creator? A shadowy figure in this issue who's in league with a 2-bit mob boss. The mob boss eventually kills the figure, but we never learn anything about that figure. Not definitively. We don't know what he wants. We know that he's not from Earth, but we don't know anything else. Thor fights the growing man and just beats him. He fights the Replicus, and Replicus just malfunctions and goes inert. He fights the Super Skrull, an alien who is given the powers of the Fantastic Four, all of them. So he can turn invisible. He has the strength of the Thing. He can stretch his body like Mr. Fantastic. He can turn to flame and fly and throw bolts of fire like the Human Torch. When the Super Skrull first premiered in Marvel Comics, I said to myself, as I only had beagles for company and they didn't read comics, I said to myself, well, technically speaking, this character would not be beatable. There isn't a Marvel character who could beat this character. You know, there isn't a Marvel character, Thor certainly included, who what if the Super Skrull turned invisible, used Mr. Fantastic's stretching power and the Thing's strength in order to deliver a haymaker to the hinge of Thor's jaw from half a mile away while invisible? Well, okay, that Thor would be beaten. There would be simply no way to if the Super Skrull kept his mouth shut and just talk all the time, he could easily beat any Marvel character. It wouldn't even be a contest. But it is a contest with Thor, and Thor manages to work it out. But the main oh, look at this. Okay, great. I didn't think that I actually had the panel that I wanted to show you. The one I described, where the Destroyer, I live again. The Destroyer comes to Asgard. Look at this Asgardian architecture that Kirby came up with. Isn't that just great? Because he had no idea what a Norse world would look like, I guess. But there's a great moment where that I told you about, where Thor leaps into battle. See what Kirby does there? Where the hammer's going in one direction and Thor's going the other, and it works perfectly. It's just a perfectly designed panel to communicate speed even without motion lines. You don't need them. It's just so perfectly done. And this is the page that I was talking about. Thor strikes the Destroyer over and over and over again and finally topples him. But that's not what we were talking about. We were talking about what I consider to be the highlight of this epic collection, which is a story about beings called the Enchanters, who possess the living talisman. Now, the issue, and soon shall come the Enchanters, starts off with a gimmick that Stan Lee does many times to start issues of Thor in this period, where he'll do a little comic bit where Thor interacts with a normal person or normal people. There's one that in an earlier issue that I didn't show you where a kid on a moped challenges Thor to a race at the beginning of the issue. And Thor climbs on the moped behind him, swirls his hammer, and they're suddenly flying over Manhattan, and the kid is begging to get back on the ground. There's another encounter like this in a different epic collection where Thor encounters a bunch of hippies, a bunch of beatniks. And he shows them the grandeur of the world, if only you will drop in instead of dropping out. And probably the most famous one of all here that's been homaged a couple of times in Marvel Comics is the start of this issue, which is inked by Bill Everett. So Vince Colletta leaves off the inking duties for this issue. Instead, Kirby is inked by an artist who's every bit as good as he is. in his own right, Bill Everett, with not bad results. And this starts off in a famous way. Thor is at a soda joint. he's having a malt, and that's how it starts off. And he thanks the proprietor, and then goes on his way. But not before he has told the kids at the soda joint what Asgard is like, including its monarch. You have a full-page spread of Odin. And what does Thor say about it? Let it suffice to be known that he is Odin, the all-wise, the truly omnipotent. Odin, maker of the law, speaker of the word, keeper of the face. Odin, the lasting power, the lightning wrath, the living judgment. Verily, he be Asgard incarnate. And for the god of thunder, he be one thing more. He be flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood. He be father. I wouldn't be that proud of that if I were Thor, because Thor's got nothing but grief from this crazy old guy. But we get many scenes throughout this epic collection of Thor transforming back into Donald Blake and gaining a warm heart by helping ordinary people as a doctor. But that never lasts, because in this case, a threat is growing in a realm near Asgard. The enchanters, a series of three brothers, are yearning to expand their horizons. They each possess a breastplate called the Living Talisman that appears to be living separate from them and yet conjoined with them somehow, and it has enormous power. And despite the fact that Thor has just told us that Odin is all-knowing, and despite the fact that in every panel where Odin appears, he says himself that he is all-knowing, when he thinks that there might be trouble brewing over yonder with the enchanters, he sends Balder and the lady Sif. He sends two of Thor's friends, two Asgardian warriors, on horseback, to go to this land and figure out what's going on. Why he doesn't know, I have no idea. Why he doesn't go himself, I have no idea. Why he can't seem to separate an astral version of himself and look at faraway events the way we see Loki, his foster son, doing all the time. I have no idea. But he sends them, and they eventually meet the enchanters. They don't look like nice people, do they? And you can see the living talisman that each one has on his breastplate. They are Magnir, Brona, and Forsung. Forsung is the oldest and the most powerful of the three. And they, first of all, they try to kill Balder and Sif by sucking them down in quicksand, but Sif whisks them away. She whisked them to Earth. She doesn't whisk them back to Asgard to warn Odin that all of his worst fears are true, and that the enchanters have openly said they are now going to attack Asgard and kill Odin. They don't go back to Asgard to warn Odin. Instead, they go to Earth, and they start arguing with the stereotypical Stan Lee era beat cop. There's always a beat cop who's saying, "You super guys are crazy." Not exactly the reaction that a beat cop would have after he'd seen these beings destroy Manhattan several times. But they go to Earth, and they start asking, pray tell, officer, dost thou know where Thor is? And the beat cop eventually says, hey, that doctor, Dr. Donald Blake, he often finds Thor for the department. Maybe he can help. And they say, well, who's that? Lead us to him. But before they meet Dr. Donald Blake, which is an interesting moment, it's an interesting little detail, before they meet him, we get some great Kirby artwork that's easy to overlook because it's just in passing. Because the enchanters decide to on a two-pronged attack. Two of them, Brona and Magnir, will go to Earth and attack Thor. That's why they were hoping that Sif would actually lead them to Earth, so they would know where to find Thor. Whereas Forsung will go to Asgard and attack Odin directly. And look at this panel that Kirby does. Look at that. Again, you have the shadowy figures. You don't see their faces. And they're walking side by side in unison while the motion is the debris in the background. And all of that shadow works so perfectly. It's just so perfectly foreboding. And it's followed up by the next panel. When they vanish to go to Earth, they leave their smoldering footprints behind. That's just awesome. But the thing that really got my attention when I read this issue, you have Balder and Sif in the waiting room of Dr. Donald Blake, and he knows them. They don't know him. They just know he might be able to find Thor. Donald Blake actually grabs Sif and says, "What is it? If you're here, it must be something serious." And Balder says, "Unhand her, mortal. None may touch she whom the god of thunder hath chosen." And Donald Blake says, "Well, one person can," and he transforms into Thor, which is great, okay, because then the adventure can get on. The three of them can fight the enchanters. But the thing that struck me when I was reading that is, wait, so Balder and Sif didn't know? Didn't know what? How much didn't they know? Obviously, they don't know that this particular mortal is the alter ego of the friend they've known for thousands of years. But did they not even know that Thor had a mortal alter ego? Is that it? That doesn't seem to make much sense, since earlier in this same collection of issues, Thor mentions it outright. And wouldn't it have been the scuttlebutt around Asgard that Odin had given Thor a mortal identity on Earth? Wouldn't the Asgardians, in other words, have wondered where Thor is all the time? He used to be hanging around all the time. Now he's not here. It seems weird to me that in this particular moment would be the moment when Balder and Sif, Thor's two closest friends, realize that he's Dr. Donald Blake. That just seemed odd to me. But nevertheless, the issues go on. Now, one of the faults here, that moment that I showed you with Harrican, where he charges across the bridge to Valhalla, that really should have been the final Tales of Asgard. The Tales of Asgard after that got pretty bad. But the highlight here, this epic collection goes on from here. Odin, once again, the wrath of Odin once again visits itself on Thor, and despite the fact that Odin has just recently said, you're a great guy, you're my son, you're noble beyond words, all that sort of thing, he once again throws a hissy fit and strands Thor on Earth with no powers. So he can't, his hammer won't return to him, his hammer's not enchanted anymore, and the only thing that Thor has going for him is his natural-born physical strength. That's part of his muscles and his bones and his sinews. Odin can't do anything about that, but he can do everything else. He takes everything else away, and there's a long stretch there that had its ups and downs, mostly downs. But for me, the highlight of this issue is the issue of this battleground, Earth, where Thor and Balder and Sif now are together on Earth, and they realize that the enchanters are coming, and they have to fight them. Two of them are coming, and the third one is going to Asgard to fight Odin. See, there he shows up. And he has a goal in mind. He wants to get at the Odin sword, which we've talked about on this channel before. It's a giant sword that Odin created that sits in one of his many palaces. And if you unsheath the Odin sword, you cause the end of the universe. So you've got the Odin sword, and you've got Odin's scepter, which is a whole other story, and you've got the destroyer. It's like Odin's toys are really dangerous. Why does he keep making these things and then leaving them hanging around? Why does he do that? But the enchanter says, "I shall pit my power of supreme enchantment against thine, and the victor's prize shall be the all-powerful Odin sword, which doth repose in yonder vault." And Odin says, "But know you, Forsung, when the Odin sword moves, it may well signal the end of the world." And Forsung says, "No matter, 'twill be the end of thy world, not mine." It's not what Odin's saying. He's saying it's the end of the world. You'll be killing yourself if you do this. We had the same question come up with the Mangog, the mighty Mangog, a being possessed of the strength of a billion beings. Why is his goal to pull the Odin sword? He himself will die. They decide, Thor, and this whole time this is happening, Thor is fighting the other two enchanters on Earth. But Odin and Forsung decide in Asgard on a contest between the two of them. And it directly contradicts what Forsung has just said. Forsung has just said, "Through the power of my supreme enchantment, I will prove the victor, and I will get the Odin sword and kill myself with it," I guess is what he's saying. But when we return to Asgard, they have come up with a pact, Odin and Forsung. That is Odin's scepter that they are holding. They're going to channel their energies between it. And the deal is that Forsung will not use the power of the living talisman, and Thor will not use the power of any Asgardians. Odin will not siphon power from any Asgardians. They'll just be mano a mano as they let the mystic battle begin, which rages all over space and time, we're told. And since the power of Asgardians has been withdrawn, Thor is once again thrown back only on his physical strength, but the enchanters lose their ability as well. They lose all of the magic that they were doing. So they were under Odin's power all along? He could have withdrawn their power anytime he wanted? And if that's true, then can he withdraw Forsung's power? And if he can, why would he engage in a fight? Why wouldn't he just deal with this person? It's like a cop gets to a bank robbery. The robber turns on him with a gun pointed, and the cop says, "Well, we'll have a draw here at the count of 3, and if you're faster than I am, you get the money." No, that's not how you deal with somebody who's threatening all life in the universe. Once again, an example of Odin being a bad king. He is a bad king. We saw last time. Well, last time we talked about him, we saw that he put a spell of forgetfulness on himself and left Asgard without telling anyone where he was going or when he'd be back. Be that as it may, the enchanters lose their power as well, and suddenly Thor can easily beat them. But that doesn't. They are still stranded on Earth, and that doesn't let them figure out what's going on in Asgard. But what's going on in Asgard is pretty grim on a number of levels. The main thing is Odin has prevailed. They have returned, and not only has he defeated Forsung, but he has killed Forsung. Forsung and the Living Talisman they're dead. And Odin grabs the remnants of the Living Talisman and shatters it in his hand, yelling, lots of yelling, says, "Death to the foes of Asgard, the golden realm shall e'er endure. I have spoken." And you're thinking, okay, well, you just fought a fight. Maybe it was hard for you and harder than you're letting on. You won. Your opponent is dead. You have a right to gloat just a little bit. Then Odin goes on. This moment struck me when I first read this issue. He goes on from there in a way that I've never stopped thinking about. He keeps yelling, but Forsung is dead. So he starts yelling at his own people. He says, "Odin is the power supreme. Odin is the word, the way, and the wonder. Let all who live know them this. Odin is just. Odin is merciful, and yet Odin is a vengeful liege. Odin is an angry liege. Odin is now and forever supreme, and woe to him who strays from righteousness. Or the rage of the All-Father is truly eternal, and his judgment all-consuming." Look at that. He's a terrifying shadow cast over his own people. What did they do? They didn't do anything. They didn't even want him to fight Forsung. But suddenly he's yelling at them, saying, anyone who strays from righteousness, I am a vengeful God, essentially threatening them all. And when I read that, I thought, well, wait a minute, that sounds a lot more like Forsung than it does Odin. Are we sure that the white guy won this battle and isn't just tricking everybody? That this is maybe heavy-handed laying the groundwork for future issues? Nothing ever comes of it. I think the enchanters did return, even though Forsung is dead. I think they did return, but Thor does not. Odin's furious with him, once again, and strips him of his power. And that there follows a few issues of Thor just being a t-shirt wearing long-haired guy who is incredibly strong. But for me, that issue was the highlight. This Battleground Earth. Mainly because I don't quite know what's going on there. I don't quite know even now. I think there's an alternate reading of most of Thor's continuity in which if Odin is not Odin, it makes sense. You can see the split personality there, right? We saw a panel just a couple of issues ago where Odin says to Thor, "You are the greatest, you are my son, and I love you. You can marry whoever you want. Anyone who crosses you will cross me. I'm your father. I'm proud of you." Only to, a couple of issues later, what? He's not only raging at Thor, but he's raging at his own people. I might still cling to that conspiracy theory. But anyway, that is, let me get you the cover again here, because the cover isn't with my digital issues. But that is our comic for today. That is The Wrath of Odin in the Epic Collection. And I have a feeling I may have used one too many favors in this case, because I have a feeling Michael K. Vaughan is going to want to pick the next one, so who knows what it will be. Fortunately, I think our tastes mostly align, so maybe it won't be so bad. I'm still scarred from that 70s horror trip down memory lane. But, what's the worst that he could do? Don't say Blue Beetle. Don't say Blue Beetle. Anyway, I'll wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.